Chapter 9, Egg Grading and Certification Services. Federal State Grading Programs. For over 70 years, USDA, in cooperation with various states, has conducted a voluntary federal state egg grading service. The legislation authorizing this service provides that it be conducted on a self-supporting basis, financed from fees charged to the applicants. The grading service is based on the U.S. standards for quality of individual shell eggs and the U.S. grades and weight classes for consumer and nest run grades of shell eggs. In addition, contract purchase specifications serve as another basis for performing grading or inspection of lots of eggs tendered for delivery under purchase agreements. The various purchase specifications are, of course, based on the U.S. standards for quality of individual shell eggs. Although the first quality standards for individual eggs were developed in 1925, the first standards for grades and weight classes were enacted under the Agriculture Marketing Act of 1946. It was during this period that the U.S. government became involved in developing grade standards for numerous agricultural products. The application of standardized requirements for eggs became essential in fair trade and subsequently impacted the economical spectrum within the industry. In the early days of the federal state grading service for poultry and eggs, the work consisted largely of examining eggs and poultry purchased by the U.S. Navy to determine compliance with procurement specifications. Grading and inspection service of this type was gradually extended to other government agencies and private institutions that purchased eggs and poultry products. Grading offices were established at the important terminal markets along the east and west coast, as well as in the inland terminal markets such as St. Louis, Missouri, and Chicago, Illinois. These offices, in addition to providing grading services for eggs, poultry, and poultry products, handled the market news reporting activities which began at about the same time. The growth of the service was slow at first, but expansion continued at a steady pace during the 30s. The most rapid expansion occurred during World War II in connection with government buying programs for the armed forces. And it was during this period that resident grading programs developed into major importance. The use of the services and the volume of products inspected and graded continued to expand after the end of the hostilities. This expansion was due in part to the price support programs that followed and to the fact that firms had previous experience with federal state grading and inspection programs and were continuing to use them in their processing and marketing programs. Under these programs, a qualified USDA licensed grader, whose duties included the grading of shell eggs in accordance with U.S. standards, was placed in the processing plant. With the advent of this resident grader type of service, the volume of products graded on a fee basis became proportionately less important. Considering the overall volume officially graded, resident services are usually performed by graders who are assigned to a specific plant on either a full-time or part-time basis. Today, resident graders are used in the production areas as well as in the distribution centers. Resident grading offers several advantages over the terminal, market, or fee type of grading services. Graders are constantly available to grade and certify the pack, whether in cartons or loose. Grading is likely to be more uniform because the grader is continuously available to check the accuracy of the candlers and processing equipment. By constantly sampling product and monitoring the grading operation, Graders can detect quality problems before large amounts of product are packed and rejected. Depending on the volume of product graded, cost of resident grading service is usually substantially less per unit than intermittent fee grading. Only resident plants are allowed to identify product with a USDA grade shield. Grading service can also be provided on a temporary plant as needed basis when requested by the applicant. Temporary plants must meet the same minimum facility operating and sanitary requirements specified in the regulations for resident services. All processing, grading, and packing of product identified with the grade shield must be completed under the supervision of the assigned grader. Fee grading is performed when an applicant requests grading of a particular lot of eggs, often for verification of grade, size, or compliance with other contract requirements. Requests for this type of service are usually made on an irregular basis, and the charges are based on the time needed to perform the work. USDA's grading service for shell eggs are permissive in that individuals, firms, or governmental agencies that desire these services may request them on their own volition. Application for grading service is usually made by telephoning the local USDA grading office or by contacting the Federal State Supervisor's Office. Prospective applicants for egg grading services may also contact USDA in Washington, D.C. regarding the availability of grading service in their areas. Services are performed on the basis of regulations governing the voluntary grading of shell eggs and the U.S. standards, grades, and weight classes for shell eggs. Today, voluntary egg grading and certification services are administered by the Poultry Programs Grading Branch of USDA's Agriculture Marketing Service, AMS. Grading and certification is performed by USDA licensed graders who are supervised by the state, regional, and national supervisors of the service. Graders may be either state or federal employees. Cost of service. The legislation that authorizes federal state grading programs provides that the cost of the service be covered by fees charged to firms who use the service. Schedules of charges have been established to cover these costs, included as cost items are the salaries and fringe benefits of the graders who perform the service, travel costs incurred in connection with grading activities, clerical assistance in maintaining necessary office records, supervisory costs at the field level, and administrative and overhead costs at the Washington level. Fees for grading service performed on a resident or continuous grading basis are based on the cost to USDA of furnishing the grader or grades to the plant, plus an overhead administrative charge based on the volume of the product handled in the plant to cover supervisory and other costs. Salaries of federal resident graders are based on the U.S. government's General Schedule GS rates. The charges for grading shell eggs on a temporary plant fee basis are based on the time required to render the service. The fee schedules are updated from time to time as costs change. Whether the grading is done on a fee basis or a resident basis, the cost will generally average only a fraction of a cost per dozen eggs. Cooperative agreements. The federal state egg grading service is conducted under cooperative agreements between USDA and one or more cooperating parties within most of the states. The agreements are usually made with the state departments of agriculture. State colleges and extension services often cooperate in the educational aspects of the grading program by providing training for prospective graders and by explaining the federal state program to producers, handlers, and consumers. State departments of agriculture are usually responsible for the administrative phases of the program within their states. These responsibilities may vary from state to state. There are two main types of agreement: state trust fund and federal trust fund. Under the state trust fund agreement, fees charged are collected and held in trust by the state. The applications for service are between the state and the individual firms, and the resident graders are state or federal employees. To cover the costs of the federal supervision of the program and federal graders working within the state, the cooperating state periodically reimburses USDA from the state trust fund. Under the federal trust fund agreement, the contracts for services are between USDA and the individual firms, and the fees are collected and held in trust by USDA. The employees doing resident grading work are federal or state employees, and the state is periodically paid an amount out of the trust fund that is in accordance with the terms of the agreement.